On this edition of Independent Sources, pushing deferred action. Immigration activists gear up for a fight to implement President Obama's controversial policy. And Mahalo, New York. A South American immigrant brings some sweet treats to Western Queens. Those stories and more coming up. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Abi Ishola. Pro-immigrant activists around the country are ramping up their efforts to convince the Supreme Court to reinstitute the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, DAPA, that a federal appeals court rejected late last year. The DACA and DAPA are expected to prevent nearly 5 million undocumented immigrants from being deported. Detractors say the programs offer a free pass to immigrants who have cheated the system, while advocates claim the legislation will keep families together and prevent millions from returning to dangerous countries that they fled. Pierre-Pierre spoke to Francis Mahdi of the New York Immigration Coalition about how far they are willing to take their fight.
Francis Mahdi, how optimistic are you that the Supreme Court will uphold President Obama's executive orders on DACA and DAPA?
We at the New York Immigration Coalition are very optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to rule in our favor, given that when the president took this executive order, he did it within his constitutional power, and that's what's going to be discussed in the Supreme Court in the next few months.
Obviously, you have 23 states who sued and challenged his authority on these issues. So why are you optimistic? Since a lower court had already knock the decisions down, and so, the president and the White House have taken it to the Supreme Court. So what are the signs that you're seeing that the Supreme Court will really uphold these?
I would say community. We are a growing immigrant community in the United States. We have power. We have been organizing since these executive actions, and even before they were announced, we had been organizing to get our government, whether it was Congress or the president, to make sure that they pass some executive actions or comprehensive immigration reform. We got the executive actions in November 2014. Unfortunately, because of the ruling in Texas, we weren't able to put them in full effect. And we have been organizing and putting so much pressure ever since. We're very confident that we're going to get these programs going by June. Mostly because we have about 5 million people that will benefit from them.
Give us a sense what's at stake here. You mentioned 5 million people. For those of our readers or viewers, rather, I'm sorry, I'm used to print, who are not familiar with the issue, what's at stake here?
It's 5 million lives who are sort of like in pause. They're waiting for these programs to go in effect. They're afraid that at any day they might get deported because they don't have a status in this country. Many of them have been living here for so many years. They have children. Their families are here. We want to keep them together. We want to make sure that they can also contribute back to this country as they have been doing, but by giving them the power to work better jobs and to contribute back. Some
detractors would say, listen, these people are here illegally. They should go back to their country and await their turn to come here legally. What do you say to that? I mean, it's not just detractors. You have Donald Trump, presidential candidate on the GOP, and the whole GOP slate, if I'm not mistaken, they all have said, deport them.
Right. It's so easy to play into scapegoating, especially when you're in such a position of power as many of these political candidates. I think it's important to remember that our immigration system is so broken in a way that it doesn't allow people to actually come here through many other legal ways. Many of them are forced out of their countries because of violence, because of past policies that the U.S. put in place in these countries. And so in a way, there is a responsibility to receive these people here, to make sure that we also can support them, and in a way to help these countries end such violent environments so that they can safely go back as well. But in the meantime, if we are able to help them live better lives, we should be able to.
So what's the coalition's plan of action to ensure that you get the result that you think is necessary for these people to have better lives?
So we are working with several national organizations doing actions all over the country, especially in major cities, and even within the state we have been doing
for
actions.
Instance, in New York City, what are you doing here?
So the most recent thing that we did was an action, a press conference and a rally in support of DAPA and DACA last week in a church, a sanctuary church, which is a place where many immigrants can go when they want to hide from immigration. We held a press conference there. We asked the Supreme Court to include DAPA and DACA in their agenda this year, and many other organizations across the country did the same thing. We're planning to continue these actions, including a civil disobedience in Washington, D.C. in the next few weeks. We just want to make sure that they can hear us and that they can understand that this is important and that there are families waiting for it.
Mm-hmm. And tell us what's the difference between DAPA and DACA?
Sure. So DAPA is the Deferred Action for Parents, and DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The first DACA was introduced in 2012. That's the first program that's still running, and that allows young people who came here with certain requirements at a young age to apply for a temporary work permit and work in this country. Okay. DAPA, it's very similarly in that it allows people to have a temporary work permit, but it's only for parents of U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents.
Mm-hmm. Now, is the White House throwing its weight behind this fight, or is it remaining passive?
Actually, the White House has been on top of this case ever since it was taken by a lower court in Texas and New Orleans. In fact, they were also the ones who filed for an appellation once the first decision was made. And right after New Orleans didn't rule in our favor, it was the Obama administration once again that asked the Supreme Court to take these cases. Are
you working collaboratively with White House staffers on this issue?
Our national partners do. We sort of work in a national coalition of organizations. Our partners in Washington are the ones who do most of this work.
Give us a sense of this coalition. How many organizations are part of it, and strategies? And stuff like
sure.
that?
These are hundreds of organizations all over the United States. Very recently, actually, we held a national conference that brought together 1,400 people to Brooklyn, and we discussed immigration issues, and it was in part a collaboration with these coalition of organizations nationwide. I can tell you that most of them tend to be from the major cities like LA, San Francisco, even Washington, Boston, and New York City, among many others. But it includes organizations that are all over the nation.
Okay. In 2012, after Obama's re-election, and 2 years later after the Republicans just lost it, and we thought for sure that immigration reform was imminent. The Latino vote had gotten stronger, and other groups had mobilized around some sort of immigration reform. So what happened? Now we're in 2016. We're fighting for executive orders to be reinstated or to be applicable in this case. And what happened?
So I'll tell you, we as a nation are treating immigration as a political game. It's a very dangerous political game because we're playing with people's lives. Every day, many people get deported and are not given the chance to give back to this country. I feel that ever since Obama's re-election, and even in 2008, he was still talking about an immigration reform. Unfortunately, especially thanks to Congress, we haven't been able to pass it. There is a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment that these politicians use to make sure that they don't have to deal with these bills, with immigration in general. And like I said, it is very political if you think about it. I feel that as organizations, we have the opportunity to educate our communities, and by educating them, we can put pressure on them and their legislators to do something about these bills. But in the meantime, we also want to make President Obama accountable. because he did run for office and he did promise that he will pass immigration reform. And so that's one of the reasons why you see programs like DACA and now DAPA in place.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Francis Maddie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
When we come back, what happens in the kitchen when Southern home cooking fuses with northeastern panache? Before that, Crystal Lowe has some other news.
Thanks, Abby. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. A group of Washington Heights vendors is demanding the approval of the Small Business Job Survival Act. El Diario La Prensa explains that the legislation would prevent the displacement of many small businesses in an increasingly gentrifying neighborhood. The bill states that there should be equal negotiation terms between landlords and merchants and arbitration by an impartial third party when required. It also calls for a minimum 10-year lease with the right to renewal. Some politicians and law experts say the bill amounts to illegal commercial rent control. City Hall told El Diario that the administration is against rent control. However, the Small Business Job Survival Act solutions and others must be explored and discussed. From the Amsterdam News, the Harlem nonprofit, the Northern Perinatal Partnership, is bringing free doula care to women across New York City. This comes in the wake of a recent study which showed that doula care brings down healthcare costs. Doulas are people who are trained to assist women through childbirth and beyond. Birth doulas provide continuous physical, emotional, and informational support to mothers and their partners before, during, and immediately after childbirth. The Times Ledger reports that a documentary exploring the brutal anti-gay murder of Julio Rivera in 1990 will debut in Jackson Heights. The premiere will be at the very same school where he was hunted down by 3 members of a skinhead gang and killed. This tragic event sparked the coming out of New York's largest and until then mostly closeted LGBT community. Julio of Jackson Heights will be screened in the auditorium of PS 69, where Rivera was murdered in the schoolyard. The film will run during the Queens World Film Festival from March 15th through the 20th. And finally, the Longwood Art Gallery at Hostos Community College is hosting an exhibition titled Bronx, Africa that will showcase the artistic interpretations of the continent of Africa from a Bronx perspective. The Riverdale Press reports that the multimedia show will feature the work of 25 artists. Its curator, Mr. LaRon P. Brooks, says that the exhibit will cast a spotlight on the African spirit within the borough and how the vast identity of the continent is translated. Bronx, Africa opened earlier this month and will be on display until May 4th, 2016. Those are just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be right back.
Thanks for staying tuned. When Nicole Taylor moved to New York in 2008, she brought along her Georgia roots and her love for cooking family recipes. It wasn't long until her northeastern experience started to seep into her southern origins. Taylor documented that fusion in her very first recipe book, the South Cookbook, Chasing Dixie in a Brooklyn Kitchen. I spoke to Taylor about how she poured her love for food and family into this project.
Thanks for being on the show, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
So the South Cookbook, I have my copy, but for those who haven't flipped through the pages, describe what they'll see when they get that book.
The South Cookbook, Chasing Dixie in a Brooklyn Kitchen, is definitely a culinary story or my journey from Athens, Georgia, or the state of Georgia, and then moving to Brooklyn. So there are over 100 recipes, classic Southern recipes, and the other ones are influenced by me living right here in the Northeast.
Cool. So why the name Up South?
Oh, Up South. It means so many different things. I think one of the Harlem Renaissance poet used the word Up South kind of to describe the migration, one of the first migration when folks were moving from the South and then moving to Harlem or moving to the Northeast, where they brought all the Southern sensibilities or the food and the music and all that stuff. But I kind of used the word Up South because it meant, you know, being inspired by folks who are from the South living in New York City. And it just keeps me connected to my home state and to the traditions of food.
Yeah, I know you once shared a story about how, as a young person, you would always hear people say, "Oh, such and such moved up."
Yeah,
north.
yeah. One of the things I would hear, my great aunt, you know, she lived in Washington, D.C. for over 50 years. And I would always hear people on the phone say, Aunt Bessie Goolsby is up north. And so the up north is almost kind of the same thing as up south. It denotes this move, this migration, something bigger, something better.
Nice. So I know a lot of the book contains stories of the women in your life who inspired you and taught you how to cook. Can you share some of that with us?
Oh yeah. So I mean, every single recipe starts off with a story or anecdote. Most of them are stories from, you know, my mother, my aunts, and other women in my family. One of my favorite stories, I like to talk about my two aunts and my mother and their cast iron skillet wars. They have these cast iron skillets that are probably at this point probably the same age as them, so almost 70 years old, and it's only 3 of them. And they like bicker back and forth. They like borrow it when they're doing a big kid Sunday dinner, and then they're like, I never got the cast iron pan back. So it was really funny, and I really want one. I'm like, yeah, a good old school cast iron skillet is like, it's like the holy grail, right?
Wow.
I can't even get one because they're always bickering about it. So that's a really cool story that I have in there. And then I also have stories about, you know, moving to Brooklyn and being a part of the first Brooklyn swappers, food swappers, BK swappers. A group of women came together right in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and started swapping food and larder items. And it really spawned a whole movement all over the country with folks like swapping jams and homemade breads and biscuits. So you'll see that story inside of the cookbook as well.
So how did the women in your life inspire your style of cooking?
Wow. When I think about the women in my life and how they put food on the table, it's like against all odds and being, how can I say this? Pressing through, no matter what, they came home and put dinner on the table. Dinner, breakfast, and sometimes lunch, you know, 3 meals a day. And so seeing, you know, those work ethics and seeing the tenacity of making a way out of no way and, you know, taking a can of salmon and making salmon patties for like everybody in the house and people that came over to visit. That really influenced this cookbook and really influenced other things in my life. What it means to persevere and what it means to always be able to feed people or nourish people in some kind of way. So I think those are the biggest lessons that are actually lessons in the kitchen and lessons outside of the kitchen as well.
Great. With such a unique concept for a book, when I say unique, I mean it's not the typical soul food book.
Yeah.
How difficult was it to get a publisher?
So, you know, when you look at the landscape, the landscape of cookbooks, there are not a lot of African American cookbooks that are published every year. This year, and actually, well, last year, 2015, this fall, I think 6 cookbooks came out, all by Black women, all, you know, their stories, very different stories. And that was huge because, you know, you can go 2 or 3 years and there aren't any books by Black folks that are being published by major publishers. So that is a big deal. And a lot of times what you see or what people think when they see a woman of color from the South, that it's a soul food book. Yeah. I like to say that my book isn't soul food. And when I, you know, got with my agent, she believed in me from day one. And she didn't even look at my cookbook proposal. I think she just saw the tenacity of me, you know, wanting to tell my stories. She never even brought up the word soul food. But I think a lot of publishers, when we presented it to them, they were like, maybe this can be a soul food book. We need a new soul food book. And I think my story resonates with all types of people and not necessarily folks who are looking for soul food.
How did they want you to change it?
I think some publishers, first of all, my publisher is the Countryman Press. They are an imprint of Norton. They did not ask me to change a thing in this cookbook. I mean, they were like, we love it, we love the idea, we love the concept, and they gave me creative freedom to be able to do this book. But I think other publishers who were initially sort of interested thought, well, maybe this could be a soul food book. Because if you look at the soul food category, if you go on, you know, Amazon, or if you go to your local bookstore, you'll see that there aren't that many books about soul food that are being published. But everybody, that's not their story. You know, every story is not about soul food. I didn't grow up eating soul food every day. We had, you know, what folks would consider soul food or Southern food on maybe one day a week on a Sunday after church or special occasions. It's not the food that I grew up eating every single day.
Yeah. One of the dishes in your book is in your greens and things section. And I love it. It's collards gomai, and it's a Japanese dish, but you put your own twist.
Yeah.
Can you describe that and some of the other dishes that you love in that book?
Yeah, the collards gomai is one of my favorite. Actually, the greens and things, the chapter, which is basically greens and fresh salads, totally one of my favorite chapters. It's Japanese collard greens, or what I would like to say traditionally gomai is spinach. If you go to Japanese restaurants or you go to a Japanese household, they'll be cooking, or they'll have on the table spinach, and it has sesame and a little soy sauce. So I decided, or actually one of my friends, Nina, I was like, we should collaborate. I want you to contribute something or inspire me for the cookbook. And I was like, let's do collards. And so that's how that recipe came along, and it's inside of the book. So the collard gomai, it's great. One of my other favorites is the bok choy salad, the raw bok choy salad with peanuts and blue cheese and a very light vinaigrette. Bok choy, you know, it's something, I didn't really grow up eating bok choy. I had a lot of peanuts. I love nuts. And so that's one of my favorite salads too, where I definitely weave my experiences of living here in New York City and shopping in the farmers markets in New York City with my Southern sensibilities, the collards, the nuts, all the other great greens that I grew up seeing and eating.
Well, everything sounds really delicious. Thank you so much for being on the show, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come, passion fruit filling and coconut sprinkles are just some of the treats that await at a new Queens bakery. Finally from us, Guyanese native Sunita Shuden is bringing a tropical fusion to Glendale, Queens by sharing her love of sweets and treats at Mahalo, New York Bakery. We find out more in this report produced by Sherry McNeil.
My name is Sunita Devi Shuden. I'm co-owner. My husband and I own it together, Michael Shuden. And this bakery is called Mahalo, New York Bakery. I grew up in Guyana. It's a little country in South America next to Venezuela and Brazil. I always liked baking. I used to bake for the family, and I think that just kind of snowballed into owning this. I honestly liked creating like fondant pieces more than baking. I kind of liked the decorating portion more than the baking. But owning a business, you kind of have to just wear a bunch of different hats, and that included perfecting baking. Growing up in a tropical country definitely inspired a lot of the flavors here. So things like mango passion fruit cheesecakes are a bestseller, but things like that reminds me of home. So each and every cupcake or dessert kind of reminded me of something in the past, whether it's back home or my trip in Hawaii that I spent with my husband. In Guyana, we walked around and we called each other aunties and uncles, even if they were strangers. We never said miss and sir. And when we went to Hawaii for our honeymoon, it was very similar in the sense that people walked around and called each other cousins. And I was like, wow, this is great, because you know, in New York, you don't get that feel. The flavors as well, definitely. Both of those places have the mangoes, the passion fruit, the guavas, and just the full nature of things. I just love the idea of stopping and saying hello to my family and neighbors and friends. And you know, New Yorkers can be a little bit on the stubborn side. And I wanted to create a bakery that kind of allows that feeling, that family type feeling. All of my recipes I've baked and I've tried with my family before. I've actually baked for my customers. So I'm comfortable in saying that I literally bake for my customers as if I were baking for my family, and I wanted everyone to kind of taste what I eat and get a little bit of that aloha spirit. So bringing a little bit of aloha and bringing a little bit of Guyana here definitely fits the tone, and I think Queens is just a mixed salad, for example. It's beautiful and there's so many different cultures, and food is very important to me, and I wanted to share a little bit of family. I have things like my mom's rice pudding. She makes it for me. I haven't even perfected making it as yet, and she doesn't even have a recipe. She just throws things in there and it comes out great. And people come in and they absolutely love it. I definitely want my products to just reflect Hawaii in that natural sense. So you'll find a lot of fruits, you'll find a lot of flowers, you'll find a lot of our stuff decorated to reflect nature. And that's always an inspiration as well. We bake fresh every day. Mainly I do the baking. But when you come to Mahalo Bakery, you get that sense of family. You get that sense that you're going to be welcome no matter what culture you're coming from. Everyone can love food, and who doesn't like cupcakes and desserts? And mango passion fruit is something that everyone tends to like. So if you're looking for something tropical, a little out of the ordinary from the New York desserts that you normally eat, you'll definitely find that here.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.